Mere Mortals. Book 1 by John Andrew Myers. Published by Jam Press. Humanity, a prime contributor of Eve energy, has always been aware of it, whether they know it or not. Most have assumed what they felt within could be explained away by a word, one as simple as emotion, existing only in an individual's mind. But every action in our world has an equal and opposite reaction in theirs, including volcanoes erupting and asteroids colliding, all the way down to our smallest actions and thoughts. All create the Eve. Excerpt from the Journal of Dr. Francisco Emul, Murcia, June 1894. Prologue. The marvel of it. A snarling face of weathered stone was before research professor Leigh Marie Evans, caked in ancient dust, with a heavy, arched brow and thin, beady eyes, resting above a protruding snout. She rubbed her 2-inch dry paintbrush on her torn jeans to clear out any collected dust, and continued cleaning off the scowling beast, a 6-foot serpent with 4 clawed arms jutting out like gnarled, viperous tree branches. "Hello? I know you can hear me." The voice from below tried to get her attention once again, and once again the professor continued to ignore it, as it was usually the bearer of bad, or at the very least annoying, news. That seemed the best option. Her headphones, sagging into her short and voluminous black hair, pumping heavy metal loudly enough to be heard 15 feet away, usually kept unnecessary distractions at bay, but was unfortunately rarely enough to deter the source of the voice. "You're going to keep pretending? That's great." "Why won't you people just let me work?" Leigh lamented the long silences and uninterrupted dig sessions she used to enjoy in the days prior to becoming a project lead. "Make me say it one more time." The voice below was especially upset today. "Yes, of course. Anything for you, Your Majesty." Leigh removed her headphones and wiped a layer of dust from her face. Taking a moment to roll her neck from side to side, she glanced around the enormous cavern for some peace before the inevitable argument sure to come. The rock making up the walls and floor was a lush mixture of reds, oranges, and deep browns, lit by work lamps cutting through the uneven surface to create flashes of color and shadows zigzagging across the cave like black lightning. Above, the ceiling was stained a much more dramatic shade of red, expanding like a wave up to a crest, sometimes making Leigh feel as though she were in a burgundy-laden Victorian theater 200 feet underground. Beyond the statue were 11 tall, cracked, obsidian steps, lovingly nicknamed the Dead Stairs by the few crew willing to enter the chamber. Atop these rested the most exciting discovery in all of the professor's 16 years of field work. "Turn your ass around and look at me!" The voice had reached fully perturbed. Doing as told, Leigh turned around. "You do know I'm your boss, right?" she said, mostly serious, to her assistant. The small but feisty Casey Lippmeyer was already grinding her teeth and stewing in her always dependable tall white socks and old man sneakers. With her elbows tight into her ribs, her stance was like that of a totem pole, one likely getting ready to lecture its boss on a line item gone astray within the weekly budget. 7 years Leigh's senior, and an ardent advocate of lanyards, Casey carried the temperament of a strawberry dipped in sugar, most of the time, and had been along for the ride through nearly all the ups and downs in the professor's career. following all the way from Missouri State's Archaeological Society to the University of London's Research Division. Through it all, the two women had grown as close as sisters, though none of that had made Leigh want to share the top spot. Despite knowing her assistant dreamed of being a full-fledged research partner, Casey just wasn't ready. Her current panicked state was yet another example as to why. "So, as my boss," she started with an unsure squeak, "I trust you'll be truly excited to tackle these critical items, which I am graciously bringing to your attention." Casey was forcing a smile and wringing her clipboard so intensely in both her hands Leigh feared it might snap. "Be right down." The professor took her time dusting off her shirt and gloves, and descended each step of the ladder with utmost care. But Casey didn't wait for her boss to reach the ground. "We don't have enough workers to fill rosters tomorrow, or Thursday, or Friday. Word is 4 more quit last night." "Word is?" Leigh turned with an eyebrow lift. "They didn't tell anyone they were leaving. Might be wandering the desert for all we know. I sent a group of 3 to look for them. There were plenty of volunteers." "What's that make now? 8? Leigh asked. "They do know this is just a job and not a gulag, right?" "This might be worth taking more seriously. Have you noticed how placid it's been down here? Everyone is purposefully avoiding this chamber. We're falling further behind." "The quiet helps me work." Quips were Leigh's only weapon against Casey's logic. Of course she'd noticed 3/4 of their workforce refusing to show up. Technically, the crew was not required to work any specific cavern in the site as a whole, and there were many caves in the labyrinth of tunnels that fell under that description. It was a fine print line item that stripped Leigh of much of the power she'd grown used to, and very much liked, having since becoming a lead. The detail was just one of 1,000 examples hidden within the unusual contract they had with their unconventional benefactor, whom Leigh had yet to meet face to face, which was probably for the best, considering she simply wanted to punch said benefactor in said face. "Casey would have to stop me. We're getting paid too well." The claim was true, however. They had fallen behind. When the dead stairs had first been discovered, Leigh thought it might have been the smell driving the workers away. She'd been in caves reeking of sulfur deposits and natural gas before. Nothing new. But as they began to pull away layer after layer of steel-hard rock, a strange, new stench appeared, like rotten milk without the tangy top-of-your-nose sting. Leigh was waiting, hoping to get used to it. But in 3 weeks, it hadn't happened yet. "Food stores are running low," Casey added. "Have you called the vendors with the satellite?" "Yes. The storms near the Gulf are slowing down the shipping lanes. They say it could take 2 weeks. "So, we'll ration. We've done it before. Meanwhile, I'll go ahead and stop these storms, also my fault, by the way, with my bare hands." "You could at least care!" Casey was as near to shouting as she could get away with. "I do care. I care so much, in fact, I want to finish the job so everyone can go home. What's so wrong with that?" "It's not just the food." Casey's tone was turning motherly. "It's medicine, bandages. More workers are getting sick. That is our responsibility." "Any deaths?" Leigh asked. "None so far." "Keep it that way. I don't want to spend 10 months in court. I doubt our backer does either. And stop worrying so much. My crews have always loved me in the past." Casey's right eyebrow peaked. Who told you that? Please, just look at these guys. Leigh presented the 4 workers wielding enormous rock saws who had not left her out to dry in the stench-filled chamber, at least 2 of whom she knew the names of. Hopefully, Casey won't ask which. Leigh would have gotten to know them better, but was unfortunately only fluent in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Mandarin, and the drill wielders spoke everything else. All except for a Scotsman, Jeff, whom she'd worked with on several digs before. A tall, broad-shouldered man covered in sporadic tattoos, who looked very good in his jeans today. Jeff had a buzzed head, and each ear pierced twice with silver loops. Leigh found herself gazing again, and was caught by him. Putting one foot on a crate, Jeff hoisted a 7-pound pickaxe over his shoulder for her benefit, beaming his slightly crooked, pearly whites. Remaining fairly professional and unaffected, Leigh quietly drifted off in her mind to the past few nights in her tent, in which the Scotsman had filled the role of her fun thing. Some much-needed warmth and companionship in one of the most desolate places she had ever been. But the good memories only lasted for a second. "You're still not listening!" Casey was fully shouting now, red-faced. "What do you want from me? How can I help?" Leigh asked. "I will do literally anything if you let me get back to work. Hire a whole new fleet of workers. Use robots, drones, dogs. Get the Libyan rebels to hook us up with some explosives. I bet our backer can get all of it. I don't give a shit. We just can't stop. We're so damn close to the finish line, I can taste it." Casey's eyes drooped. "This isn't fun anymore. For anyone. Don't forget, we've never worked with these people before. There's no telling how they'll react to these kinds of conditions." "What do you suggest?" "I'll get this one out of the way since you'll probably be angry. But they want to stop night digs." "The reason we started nights in the first place was to escape the sun. People were getting heat stroke." "They say they'll take their chances." "Fine. No more nights. What else?" "You need to get out there and talk to your people." "We've had worse." "No, we haven't." Casey sounded done with the conversation. She'd made her point, and Leigh knew it was true. Handling bureaucratic red tape was usually her specialty, but now they were wading in it. She was beginning to wonder if the work visas provided by their mysterious benefactor would even get them out of the country. The last place Professor Evans wished to be waylaid was in Faya Largo, Chad. "I know you've made sacrifices. I don't take it for granted," Leigh said, looking up the obsidian steps to what would surely be her Everest. "But you've got to see what we have here. This is beyond special." Jeff and the others were currently working away on the rock wall at the top of the stairs, slicing off chunks of hard red clay, uncovering sections of something akin to onyx. As the material seemed impervious to harm, they'd been ordered to cut without care, free to touch the smooth, jet-black surface. An accidental strike with a rock saw during the first week had tipped them off to the fact. As of yet, no one was sure of the stone's actual composition, how it had been polished in the first place, or why it had been buried behind blood-red rock. "Just waiting for me, I guess." Over several weeks, the structure at the top of the stairs revealed itself to be rectangular, and some 7 feet high, with a depressed edge running the length of the shape. When the saws delved into the inverted lip, it was discovered the granite was separated from the cave wall. They'd found a door. At its center, sat the only symbol or piece of writing Leigh's team had come across at the entire site. A rigid, simplistic depiction of a red eye, minus a representation of a top lid, with a sharp, white line slashing through the iris. Sort of odd, don't you think? Usually, Sow Kings got buried near their kingdoms. Casey had remarked upon its discovery. I've never been convinced that's who these people were, Leigh said. Canaan Empire, maybe, but we haven't found any evidence to suggest either society is responsible. And why so big if just for a coffin? Casey asked. Before it died, the magnetometer scans showed a monstrous cavern back there. None of this is making sense. You're kidding, right? Leigh had said, wrapping her arm around Casey's shoulder. Look at Khufu's pyramid and the Colossus of Rhodes. Old school rulers loved pompous shit. We're not here to think about the why. We're the finders. Let someone else figure out what to do with it after. Presently, Casey adjusted her glasses, as she had to every 2 minutes, and Leigh noticed a slight, nervous shake in her fingers. I assume we're still in agreement about what we do with any artifacts discovered on site? Casey said. Straight to London, same as usual. Just because we've got an anonymous donor doesn't mean we turn into pseudo-archaeologists. Those people are thieves. This guy probably operates on the black market. You're doing it again, Leigh snapped. Casey's clipboard finally cracked in her grasp. I'm sorry. I don't like being in this situation. It's foreign to me. I don't understand how you can be so calm. What will panicking do? We signed the papers. We're in it whether we like it or not. So little of this feels ethical, let alone legal. Tell me, honestly, as both a boss and a friend, what do you think is behind this door? Leigh didn't hesitate. Why ask? Let's just find out. You aren't the least bit worried? Even when you have things like that staring at you underground? Casey pointed at the gargoyle Leigh was cleaning at the base of the stairs. A second statue stood guard opposite, almost identical to the first, with 4 arms, a head on top, a body stretched and curved, and a broken section of tail connecting to the pillar on which it rested. The guardians of the dead stairs were leaned up in a defiant war cry, snarling at the heavens, though Leigh liked to think they were laughing. Much like the rest of the site, the serpentine statues gave 0 clues as to what ancient society first created them. With wholly unique designs, they did not resemble the works of any early culture or civilization on record, most of which Leigh was well versed in, having possessed a virtually photographic memory all her life, as well as a love of finding secluded spots far from the world in which to bury her nose in any history book she could find. The region itself gave no clues to the identities of the cave's original inhabitants either. Seen from above, the land around the site would have appeared stricken dead by God thousands of miles in every direction. At least, it would have if Leigh actually believed in the deity, or any others. That was Mom's department, not mine. Never before had a dig been laced with so much raw mystery. Opening the onyx door at the top of the stairs would be like opening a sealed can without a label. And I'm the lucky SOB who gets to do it. But not everyone shared the professor's enthusiasm. In fact, ever since the dead stairs had been uncovered, morale had been steadily lowering. Events such as equipment failures, animal fights, or disgruntled employees disappearing without notice hadn't seemed all that troubling initially. Leigh had dealt with each of those elements at one point or another in her career, but a continuation of disastrous events had created a fog of animosity over the dig, particularly nights at camp, once filled with music and laughter, since taken over by silence and brooding. A new sound was making itself known in the cave, mixing with the electric blades. Voices. Tense. Some were yelling. Boots were hitting the ground. Leigh looked past Casey towards the cavern entrance. "Shut the hell up!" she hollered at Jeff and the others on the stairs. The workers quieted, and soon the chamber stood silent, but only for a second, when a sudden, close shout rang through the tunnels. Leigh spotted a young man, Hasim, one of their division leads, rounding the tight corner of the entrance. His eyes and reckless speed revealed a man in dire panic. In the 2 months since he'd first approached her, tripping clumsily to extend his hand for a shake, exclaiming he was a fan of her published essays on late Ubaid period hierarchies, Hasim had never acted like this. Fidgety, sure, but level-headed. In this moment, he seemed more like a father desperately searching a crowd for a doctor to save his child's life. Leigh hurried to meet him and the others. The panicked dig crew were yelling over one another in 4 languages, turning their message to mud. The only consistency was in their fingers, pointed back the way they'd come, to the surface. She lifted her hands to halt them before they ran her down. "Hasim, what is it? Just Hasim." "It happened. They've gone mad. You have to come, quickly," he shouted. "Who?" Casey asked. "There's no who. Please, you must hurry." Hasim pleaded with his dark sienna eyes, and soon Leigh's feet were sweeping her away, leading a mob, charging the tunnels in what felt like a desperate errand. To his credit, along the way Hasim attempted to relay the story, but in his alarm, his words rebounded between French, Slavic, English, and a few others. Leigh grabbed only a handful of words. Attacked. Unbelievable. Hospital. Blood. The crew ducked passages and squeezed through tight gaps as the tunnels pitched into a steep incline as they neared the surface. Though there was an easier passageway out, that trip took at least 45 minutes longer. Without time to think, let alone powder her fingers, Leigh lost her grip on the cold, slippery rocks frequently during the ascent. "Sounds like a fight at camp," Casey gasped, short of breath. When they came to the peak of the incline, light from the surface erupted over them. Their headlamps were shut off and tossed into a crate near the entrance as the cavalcade emerged and started on the path back to camp, traversing the trench leading up the canyon, sometimes pinched too narrow for more than one person. Fighting her already tired lungs, Leigh hoped she wasn't too late to stop whatever the hell was happening at camp. "Bandits, maybe? A fire?" A sea of cries shook her guts as they came over an embankment to view a roaring cluster of movement. Almost all of them, 50, maybe 60 crew, had turned the camp to chaos. Men and women ran about, shouting, trying to break up fights while others started new ones. There was no beginning or end to it. Leigh dashed down the slope, hoping her boots would keep their grip, and careened into the pile, shoving her way forward, assuming no one would be willing to strike the check writer. Behind her, Jeff used his huge frame to pull workers off one another. "Come down!" he shouted. One look up at the giant, pale Scotsman, and all obeyed. The bodies broke away when Leigh found the eye of the storm. A centralized flurry of limbs and blood was at the center, where a small pile of men and women fought to contain a feral shape, a crazed man. His teeth were chattering, and his neck snapped to and fro as he straddled a male victim, his fingers deep inside the man's eye sockets. The man, his back on the ground, was awake, screaming in pain, unable to defend himself, so desperate for relief it was dizzying. She was frozen. Leigh had never seen anything so primal or visceral. Never imagined the inside of a human skull while the person was alive and not a relic. Finally, her instincts kicked in. "Get him away!" Grabbing a hold of the crazed man's coat, she pulled with the others. The fight seemed to perpetuate itself, with no ground gained. But eventually the attacker was lifted away, his fingers finally coming free from the poor man's sockets. Scratching and gnawing at anything he could, the crazed man continued muttering drivel under his wet breath as Jeff slid a sleeper hold around his shoulders and head. But any control quickly gained faded as the man, half his size, began squirming out. "A little help would be bloody nice," Jeff yelled, backpedaling, losing ground as the crazed man snarled and howled, nearly free. The crowd swarmed in response and grabbed control of the flailing limbs. It took their combined strength to hold him down while ropes were tied around his ankles and wrists. The chair creaked under the strain, but held firm, and soon the chaos stilled. A little. Scuffles on the outskirts sounded as the people near the center found calm, which only revealed the cries of the eyeless man writhing on the ground, whose whimpers had dissolved into desperation, for sleep or for death. A woman ran to his side with a small black pouch, yanked a needle out, and filled it with liquid from a blue bottle with a dirty label. No one seemed to panic when she injected the eyeless man, so Leigh did not intervene. In moments, he was unconscious, well enough for surgery it seemed, and she was finally able to take a real breath. A few feet away, the crazed man's eyes darted as if he were watching a swarm of flies, unaware of the moment. His upper teeth gnawed on his lower lip, already messed with blood. "What was he saying?" she asked, not sure who would answer. "He say, 'I'm saving you from seeing it,'" a Chadian local answered. "Saving?" Leigh asked under her breath, feeling knots in her stomach and pressure building above and behind her eyes. In that moment, nothing sounded better or more appropriate than a stiff drink. But unfortunately, a sea of faces was pointed her way, looking for hope and answers. The workers were scared, and with every right to be. "Gotta say something." The first notion that came to her mind was to tell them she had never experienced so much bullshit from a dig site in her entire career, and no one should lose any love they had for archaeology. Sometimes it was hot, sometimes freezing, sure, not so bad. But this desert? This particular site? Leigh didn't have the heart to tell them how short the straw they had drawn was. In fact, until this very moment, staring at their beaten expressions, she'd never considered retirement. "Hasim?" she called, hoping he was near. Luckily, her friend stepped out of the crowd. Yes, Professor Evans? She waved him over. Please translate. He nodded, helping her onto a generator box below a light post at the crowd's center. The crew waited silently with astounding patience. She spoke as loudly as her voice allowed. If anyone else is injured, please help them forward so we can give medical attention. Hasim shouted a translation over the crowd. A few minor interpreters among the crowd echoed him in additional languages. And if anyone else thinks of starting a fight, do us all a favor and march into the desert instead. We're here to work as a team. She fought to catch her breath, hoping her tone was coming across. Hasim finished. The minor translators finished too, but the workers did not smile or give a warm response. Her threat seemed to be taken exactly as such. We're all tired, and I know we all want our beds. Not the ones here, the ones back home. I want that too, but we can't stop halfway. That's not how you get the next job. She paused to let Hasim and the others catch up, and glanced at her team. Jeff smiled encouragingly, while Casey and those surrounding her seemed less enthusiastic. One woman called in messy English, "Stop digging!" But no one added anything more. Oh, that's how it is? Leigh cleared her throat. No one is keeping you here against your will. Professor Evans, Casey said tightly. Maybe less of that? Like a lot? At the same time, she tugged on Leigh's pant leg, but Leigh carried on. We all know what our contracts say. You're free to go at any time. This is a job. You're getting paid well. We're doing the best we can. Leigh halted when a hum within the crew became an uproar. What is it? Tell us so we can help. Hasim stopped interpreting to look up at her. They don't fear the dirt. They fear what the dirt will make them do. Please try to understand. She was shocked. Not Hasim, too. Don't give in to fear and superstition. We're alone out here. All we have is each other. The outskirts of the group began to disperse, releasing the crew into the camp. They were not interested in the pitch, and Leigh couldn't blame them, knowing she'd probably feel the same way if she were in their shoes. The desert is messing with you. I promise there is nothing to be afraid of, she said to those remaining. Hasim finished the last phrase, and a hushed murmur spread among the people. What is it? What did they say? Asked Leigh. They ask, what about the half-eye? He responded. The half-eye? It means nothing. There's no translation yet. We haven't found anything to suggest the temple is haunted. Believe me, I hate ghosts too. Leigh lied, having never believed in them. Hasim stopped before he finished, turning to her as though unsure how to continue. What? No mentioning ghosts? Why did you say temple? Casey asked from below. Leigh glanced around at the faces. What is with you people? I don't know. Just a basic word. Could be anything. But hey, let's stop focusing on the bad. We should be excited, Leigh said with a wave of her hand. Get ready, and make sure to get some sleep tonight, because we're opening the door tomorrow. The workers who heard her paused in unison and turned, as though checking to see if they heard her right. "We are?" Jeff asked, sounding as unsure as the rest of them. "That's what we came here to do, right?" Leigh asked, but no one nodded or vocally agreed with her. The crew then spoke at Hasim, who responded in a volley of dialogue. Voices clamored over one another. "What's going on now?" Leigh asked. Hasim and the others finished conversing before turning to her. "Nothing. They say, 'Good night, Professor.'" He nodded humbly, and he and the crew turned and walked away, disappearing into their tents. Leigh jumped down from the generator. "I think that went pretty well. They got the gist, right?" She was eyeing Hasim and a small group of crew speaking in a private huddle a few yards away. Casey was shaking visibly. "Are you trying to get us killed?" "What's that supposed to mean?" asked Leigh. "These people are on edge. One already snapped. Why are you adding stress?" "I know how to talk to my employees." Leigh was losing her patience with Casey, as well as the day in general. She looked at Jeff for some kind of reassurance. "I got no dog in this fight," he said, backing away. Leigh pointed at the ground, as though commanding a mutt. "You stay. We could use some outside opinions." He halted in place. "Professor Evans, I know you're not going to want to hear this, but..." Casey took off her glasses for added effect. "We need to discuss shutting down the dig. Temporarily." "Out of the question." Leigh turned and marched up the path to her tent, thinking she'd had the last word. But when she heard 2 pairs of boots trampling to catch up, she knew there would be more to endure. "You can't avoid this, even by running," Casey shouted up the slope. "Should I get some gasoline in a post? I'd love to get burned at the stake by nightfall." Leigh was almost to her tent. "Maybe I can get inside and pretend not to be home." "I don't know. Maybe it's for the best, you know?" Jeff suggested. Leigh halted and turned, locking eyes on him. "No, I didn't mean that," he said, shaking his head vigorously. "Didn't even say it, actually." Leigh looked Casey square in the eye. "I know you're trying to help, but as your boss, I'm telling you to back off. Now. If we shut down, someone else will step in. They always do. If that happens, we can kiss whatever's behind the door goodbye. Just look at Babylon." "No, don't. Not this again," Casey said, hanging her head. "A whole ancient city's worth of history, gone," Leigh shouted. "Icons, artifacts, every vestige or clue of who they were and how their story helped lead to us, all destroyed by Hussein and his goons." Casey groaned. "So you've said 200 times. "We're not abandoning the site. Go sleep off this frustration and come back tomorrow with a clear head." Casey's lips tightened into a clump, and she let out a heavy, supposedly calming breath. "Fine. Good night, boss." Relaxing her shoulders, Leigh watched Casey leave with a heavy heart. She didn't particularly like using her position over people, especially the only person she could remotely call a friend. But sometimes it was necessary to remind her of their true arrangement. Jeff remained for a silent, somber moment on the hillside before turning to walk away. Wait, Leigh said. Keep me company?
Professor, last time you said there wasn't gonna be a next time, and...
Call me Leigh. Jeff laughed, shaking his head.
Okay then, Leigh. Tell you what, I'll go grab some things. Be right back.
He hurried down the hill, taking periodic glances over his shoulder as Leigh continued to her tent. When he returned, the night with Jeff progressed the same as the others, except when they lay still afterwards, with his arms wrapped tightly around her. She could not fall asleep. Jeff was soon snoring, while she listened to the wind over the valley, never growing beyond a whisper. The camp was without a single sneeze or midnight cough the whole night, leaving her hours of silence to mull over the day's events. The crazed man and his eyeless victim, the onyx door ready to be opened, the workers nearly destroying the camp. I've seen paranoia before, but this is nuts. What's come over everyone? The fact that Casey was equally worried did give Leigh pause. What if she's right? What if the door should stay closed? Professor Evans was a driven individual, but not without feelings, and her senses worked fine. Time at camp was a welcome reprieve from the cold, heavy, morose sensation she got in her stomach when in the presence of the dead stairs. Which of course didn't make any sense scientifically speaking. But was it enough to throw her? The debate raged in Leigh's mind, though in the end she couldn't imagine abandoning what might be the apex of her life's work. I won't give it up. Not wasting another chance. Through a foggy plastic window on the tent door, the sky turned from pure black to a deep blue, then yellow, mixing with a crimson bulb on the horizon. The sun rose at 5:44 a.m. Most of the crew were even earlier risers than her, and would be up soon, if not already. Leigh had no trouble rising and getting dressed. The cold coffee in her thermos would do fine. Getting her feet in her boots was the hardest part. Damn! They're freezing! In addition to grabbing her thermal jacket, Leigh also packed her heaviest coat and a hat into her bag, as the temperature was likely to drop rapidly beyond the onyx door. Jeff needed to be kicked a couple of times, but managed to be ready in 5 minutes. Slinging his bag over his shoulder, he stepped to the door and yawned, finishing with a closed-mouth grin.
Something wrong? Thought you'd look more excited on a day like this.
At the moment, she was thinking positive thoughts, but wouldn't dare let him know it. Jeff was one of those rare people whom Leigh could stand for longer than 5 minutes without wanting to claw at her own face. So rather than give any indication how she really felt, "Ew, gross. Get it away." She shook her head, messed his hair a bit, and stepped out. The morning was cold, but without wind, while the sky erupted with fountains of color, with no one out to see it. Initially, it seemed that most of the workers, likely still angry with Leigh, had avoided breakfast at camp and gone directly to the site to get today over with. Then she noticed whole patches of tents were completely missing. Tapping on a door flap, she called, "Good morning. You guys sleeping in?" When there was no answer, she poked her head inside. Only the provided cots remained. Hurrying into the next tent, she found their belongings packed and gone. All the others she checked were empty, too. Jeff charged about the camp, calling the names of his friends, but no one answered. When Casey came stumbling over the embankment on the path leading to the Dead Stairs cavern, waving on approach, she appeared dazed, stopping for breath, hands on her knees, calling from afar. "They're gone! The crew is gone!" No matter where they looked, it was true. The camp had been abandoned.